What the fuck did I just read? Hi BookTube, it's Marianne at We Last Wear Book, and today I have my October reading wrap up to share. So this month I managed to finish 9 books, which is pretty good considering how busy life has been. So the first book I read this month was Down Among the Dead by Damien. This book is number 10 in the Detective Inspector Nick Dixon series. I haven't read any of the other books in the series so far, but seeing as I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars, I think I will be going back and having a wee look at the other books in the series. So the story centres around the character of Detective Inspector Nick Dixon, who is called in to help investigate a crime. A body is discovered during an archaeological dig on Sedgemoor battlefield, and they're trying to figure out who's responsible. Unfortunately, the MO of the killer fits the same as a serial killer who is already in prison, who people are actually questioning were they really responsible for the crimes all along. He's got an appeal coming up, and then conveniently around the time of the appeal, this body's found. So they're trying to figure out, as it is a mummified corpse, um, as it is a well preserved corpse, they're trying to figure out if this was done while the scythe man, because all of the victims were killed by scythe, if it was him that perpetrated these crimes prior to going to jail, or if it is a copycat killer or something else. But obviously, with forensic technology, they're able to accurately or more accurately determine when they died. So the investigation kind of goes from there. The characters are really well written. The book was quite fast paced. It was exciting. It's not overly predictable with regards to the ending and who's responsible. The relationships between the characters in the book are really good. And it keeps you guessing kind of the majority of the way through before you kind of have an inkling as to what you think might be the situation. It's really good. I would recommend it to anybody who really likes crime fiction. So the second book I read this month, I listened to on audiobook, and it was After by Anna Todd. It is the first in the After series. Now, the reason I had actually read this book to begin with was because we had watched the film on Netflix, and then my sister and I had planned on going seeing the second one at the cinema, because I'd read that there was quite a lot of controversy about it because the book was so different to the film, and I thought, right, I'm going to see what all the fuss is about. So the book centres around the love story of Tessa and Hardin. It's not quite a hate to love because they don't necessarily hate each other in the beginning, they just don't really vibe. The relationship is very toxic. This is not a blueprint for the perfect relationship, and I would not use it as a handbook to finding the perfect man or woman in your life. The film, in comparison to the book, I don't want to go too much into because I wanted to do some sort of book versus movie showdown type videos, but they are very, very different. The film is rated 12, and the books are very much more appropriate for an 18 plus audience. The and sort of border into the kind of smutty romance kind of vibe. So anyway, the story. So Tessa is just starting college, and she ends up meeting Hardin, who is a friend of her roommates. The two of them don't hit it off to begin with, but eventually sort of start building this relationship. The relationship is not, like I said, it's pretty toxic. It's not the best relationship in the world. It's quite smutty, but not overly graphic. The sex scenes are really well written in the book. I will give Anna Todd credit where credit's due, and I can sort of see where people's issues were with the film because, like I said, a 12 rating. The storyline was definitely very tamed down to make it palatable for a 12 plus audience, which is kind of unfortunate because obviously if you've got a younger audience, they're going to want to read the books, and the books aren't geared towards sort of a younger audience. The After series is very much a guilty pleasure series along the same sort of lines as 50 Shades of Grey and Twilight, in that it's a very kind of toxic relationship. The characters just don't have the right priorities, they don't function well in a relationship, they don't have boundaries. But like I said, being a guilty pleasure read, you can't look away from it because they end up getting so wrapped up in this, even though it's toxic as fuck. Well, the ending of the book to the ending of the film are very different. It will make you view the characters in a much more negative light in the book than they did in the film. I kind of wish that I had read the physical copy instead of listening to the audiobook, because I've got this weird thing with sex scenes that are read to me as opposed to read by me. So I think I might invest in the paperback just to see if I view it any differently reading it myself. Is it the best? Is it the most well written book I've ever read? No. Are they the best characters I've ever read? No. Is there character development? Yes. Like I said, it's not. It's a guilty pleasure read. It is the epitome of a guilty pleasure read. And I will be reading the other books in the series. I'm intrigued to see where it goes from there. I already have the audiobook downloaded on Scribd. I've seen the film. While I have these complaints, I still gave the book 4 out of 5 stars because it was quite addictive. You get wrapped up in the story, even so. I'm assuming there's going to be a hell of a lot of character development. I also really want to see if Ahern is going to become a much better person over the course of the books, or if he's going to stay this kind of really arrogant, possessive twat that he has been thus far. I was actually surprised to find out that After was a fan fiction, and that made me kind of uncomfortable. Because while I don't mind fan fiction, obviously 50 Shades of Grey was a Twilight fan fiction, but the After series is a One Direction fan fiction, and the character of Ahern is based on Harry Styles. And my issue there is reading fan fiction that is written about another actual real human person makes me feel uncomfortable. And it's the same sort of thing when people are shipping actors in a film instead of shipping the characters, because I don't know, it seems like, I mean, I'm imagining it if from a sort of perspective of if the character of Ahern was based on me, they've taken me and made me into this ideal example of toxic masculinity and have made him quite aggressive and rude and arrogant. I mean, maybe it's just me being petty and oversensitive, but I don't know, that I don't quite vibe with the concept of writing other people, other real life people, as opposed to fictional characters into your stories. It's a weird concept for me. So the third book I read this month was It Ends With Her by Brianna Labuskes, and it centres around the character of FBI agent Clark Sinclair, who has been chasing this serial killer Simon Cross for a long time, and she gets called in because there is a woman who has gone missing. So the story is told from three perspectives. It is told from the perspective of Adelaide, who is a young girl who is in foster care. It is told from the perspective of Agent Clark Sinclair, and it is told from the perspective of Bess, who is the woman who has been kidnapped. The story is basically a race against time to find Bess. It's very fast paced. The character of Clark is well written. Again, troubled detective. It's so common, but in this instance, it's really relevant to the story. It's necessary to be in there because it's relevant to the plotline and how the story ultimately ends. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, fast paced, characters are fairly well written. It's exciting. I didn't see the plot twist happening until maybe a chapter before it was actually revealed what the situation was. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. It's fast paced. It was enjoyable. I would read other books by the same author. So the next book I read this month was the only physical copy I read this month, and it is The Year I Met You by Cecilia Ahern. I've actually lost the dust jacket for this, so this is all you're getting at the minute. Basically, the story centres around the characters of Jasmine and Matt. Jasmine works in business startup, and Matt is a radio DJ. Matt is disliked heavily by Jasmine because he's one of those radio hosts who have very controversial opinions, not a particularly nice guy, and he has lost his job and his wife and his children. She hasn't lost her job, but she's currently on gardening leave, and it looks as if she's not going to be able to go back to her job. But eventually the two of them actually start to build a friendship, which is surprising because Jasmine holds a really, really big grudge against Matt because her sister has Down syndrome, and he has made some really sketchy statements about people who have Down syndrome. There is a really good character development throughout the book, to the point where I expected myself to like the character of Jasmine more than Matt, because obviously he has these controversial opinions and is really rude and just an unpleasant guy. But I would say he has more character development than she does, because it turns out in the end that she's actually quite because she doesn't actually, while she resents the opinions that this man has, she sort of builds on the stereotypes that he's created by sort of babying her sister. And instead of letting her live her life that she has the potential to be happy and have independence, she sort of babysits her, and she does some kind of morally questionable things throughout the book with regards to her sister. My only issue was I had seen the book going in a completely different direction towards how the book was going to end. The two characters' relationship didn't go how I wanted it to go, unfortunately, but it's fine. It was still an enjoyable story. Like I said, I think I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best book I've ever read, but it was good enough to keep me reading. The next book I read was In Our Eyes by Sarah Alderson, and this is another sort of crime thriller. And I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. It centres around the character of Ava. Her and her family are quite well off. They are victims of a home invasion, and during this home invasion, she's hurt and her daughter is shot. So her daughter's in the hospital. While the outlook isn't particularly good for her, the daughter who has been shot, she is convinced that the daughter is going to pull through this because she's already survived cancer, and she becomes focused on helping find out who perpetrated the crime. So a detective gets involved who has history with Ava. They had a sort of like mini affair thing happen at some point in the past, which I kind of saw coming, but that's irrelevant. And all of them start to believe that it was actually Ava's husband that was involved, that he was committing some sort of insurance fraud because they've lost all their money, and Ava didn't know this. There was more than one plot twist in this. My main issue with this book is it started off so strong. It was action from the start. It was really exciting. There was drama. It was so good. And then the further you got into the book, the slower the pace became, to the point where, while I was completely wrapped up in the story at the beginning, I sort of found myself kind of distracted and not enjoying it as much because it had slowed down so much. I just wish it had stayed at the same level that it was at the beginning, because to me, the way that the story sort of wanes away, it's almost as if the authors had changed. But yeah, 3 stars. It was good. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad. It was just sort of middle of the road crime fiction. Because it was a 5 star beginning and a 3 star book by the time we got to the end. So that was kind of disappointing. The next book I read was Whiteout by Danielle Girard. I gave this 3 stars, but I think it's more of a kind of 2.5 number. The story centres around the characters of Lily and Ivor. Ivor owns a bar. Lily is someone, I don't actually remember what her career is. This is how forgettable the book is, because I can't actually remember what the whole storyline was. And the character of Kelly, who is the detective who's investigating what's been happening. So Lily wakes up in a car. She's been in a car accident and has completely lost her memory and can't remember a single thing. Ivor, in the story, who owns the bar, a body is found outside his bar in a dumpster. And conveniently, he is also completely lost his memory. Now, I have no issue with amnesia and memory loss happening in a book, but it's too convenient that both of these characters are experiencing the same degree of memory loss, even though like their stories are kind of unrelated and their memory loss is caused by two different things. Lily is basically trying to remember her past, what she had done that night, what she's responsible for. Ivor is questioning, have I killed this woman? I don't remember, might have killed her, not got a clue. And Lily and Ivor kind of come together during the course of this investigation to try and figure out what the hell happened. There were too many glaring plot holes in the book. It was quite slow paced. It just really didn't work for me somehow. So the next book I read was Verity by Colleen Hoover, which I gave a solid 5 stars to. The book starts with this author called Lowen or Lowen, I don't know how you pronounce it, who gets a visit from this man, Jeremy Crawford, and is asked if she will continue writing the book series that his wife has been writing. His wife is Verity Crawford, and she is a best-selling author, and she's currently in a coma. Well, she's not in a coma, she's incapacitated. She's been in a car accident, she can't walk, she can't talk, she can't feed herself, all of that sort of stuff. And Lowen moves into their house to continue writing this book series. Now, prior to all of this happening, Jeremy and Verity have lost one of their children. Their daughter died in a tragic accident. While Lowen is starting to write this story, she ends up finding a manuscript that Verity has written, which offers some insight into Verity's mindset prior to her daughter's death and then with regards to her daughter's death. And it is so shocking. Like, when I was reading it, I was genuinely horrified, like especially reading it as a parent. Like, so Lowen and Jeremy end up developing a physical relationship. Again, like after, the sex scenes were well written. The book ends with a rather majestic plot twist. Did not see that coming. Good. I would recommend it if you like kind of psychological thrillers. So the next book I read was another 5-star, and it's probably my favourite book of the month. It was the wildest ride a book has ever taken me on in my life. I finished it and I went, what the fuck did I just read? I don't even know what genre to put this in. I mean, I suppose the closest genre that it would fit into is maybe like psychological horror. It's like so weird. It's like Alice in Wonderland meets Heathers meets Mean Girls meets, like, I don't even know. It's just so weird. So basically the book, sorry, I should have told you what the book was. Bunny by Mona Awad. The story centres around the character of Samantha, who's currently in an MFA programme doing creative writing, and basically on the same course are these group of girls who her and her best friend Ava refer to as the Bunnies. And it's this clique of girls who are very overly sweet, and they're really sort of clingy with one another. They call each other Bunny. They're very touchy-feely and just weird. One day, for some reason, the Bunnies invite Samantha to one of their smut salons, which is sort of a get-together that they have. She goes, can't understand why she's invited, but she goes anyway, and then ends up embroiled The bunny's weird cult thing that they have that involves sacrificial ritual killings, and it is so fucking weird. Like, none of it makes sense, but it makes so much sense at the same time. The ending is crazy. Um, she ends up, while she's in this cult, the way that the book is written, you can, the deeper she gets into this weird group slash cult, the more it seems as if the bunnies, instead of being individuals, they sort of have this symbiotic relationship where they behave as one, think as one. And it's like none of this book is predictable whatsoever. You don't see any of it coming. It is so bizarre that you can't. I think this is the only book this month that I read in the one sitting. It's so hard trying to explain this book to someone because they look at you as you're describing the plot and just sort of look at you like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, what are you reading? And it's very much the epitome of a Marmite book. You either love it or you hate it because it's a very sort of niche genre. It's just like in a category of its own. And I think that if you're reading this book, you're probably going to either be like a 1/2 star review or you're going to be a 5-star review. It's just so strange. I've recommended it to everybody I know that reads. This is the one book that I've read this year that I would tell anybody, regardless of your reading tastes, to read. It is so weird. It is so good. Like, it is the biggest mindfuck ever. If I could have gave it more than 5 stars in Goodreads, I would. So the next book I read this month was To Dream of You by Tamara Gill. This is just your sort of standard romantic bodice ripper type book. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The book centres around the character of Holly, who is a princess, and she's next in line to the throne of Athenia. She stumbles across this man on the beach who is unconscious, and she takes him back to nurse him to health. It turns out this man is a future duke. His name is Drew. He is from England. They find out that Princess Holly is, because she's next in line for the throne, her uncle is trying to kill her so that he can get the throne and be the king of Athenia. She runs away to England with Drew to hide from her uncle. Her uncle continues to pursue her. Drew and Holly predictably fall in love. The love scenes are well written. This love story was actually really sweet. Like, it wasn't forced. I enjoyed it. The characters seemed to work together well. You could see them together. Like I said, your standard bodice rippery kind of romance. It was sweet. It was cute. There was a happy ending. Actually, I didn't even give it 3 stars. I gave it 3.5 stars because I kind of like the whole historical romance bodice ripper vibe. It just wasn't quite on par with some of the historical romance I've read in the past. So the last book I read this month was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, and for me it was not quite what I expected. So I have seen people raving about this for months and saying it's the best book that they've read this year, and everybody's gave it 5 stars, and I only gave it 4 because it didn't live up to the hype for me, which is probably a me issue again because I think I overhyped it in my own head, and kind of was expecting too much. Mexican Gothic is a gothic horror novel that is set in 1950s Mexico. The main character, Noemi, receives a letter from her cousin who is gravely ill. She is convinced that her husband is trying to kill her, and Noemi is sent by her dad to go and check on the cousin, see how the cousin is, and potentially try and bring her back to where they live. the cousin and her husband and her husband's uncle, her husband's dad, a husband relative, live in this little countryside English manor in the middle of nowhere in Mexico. And when she gets there, she feels a kind of bad vibe with the house, a bad vibe with the people, and there's just something not quite right there. The older relative in the book is racist. He's very much into eugenics and creating the master race. There is sexism and misogyny involved. There is racism and colorism involved, which I quite like that they introduced some of these kind of social issues into it instead of just being your sort of standard horror. It was nice to include more serious elements into it that added to the story. Noemi is convinced that the house is haunted. There is something not quite right with the staff in the house. The characters are really well written. The main character, Noemi, has great character development. At the beginning of the book, she is quite not unlikable, but who doesn't really. It's not that she doesn't care about anybody else, but she really is quite narcissistic. The only other person other than herself that she seems to have a real attachment to, other than her dad, is her cousin. Hence why she's made this trip to go. But there's obviously issues with the house, issues with the people in it. The vibes are totally off while she's living at this manor, and I can't really go into too much detail to give any of the story away, but you are very much on the edge of your seat towards the end. The first maybe 3/5 to maybe the first 3/4 of the book is quite slow, but the scene setting is amazing. You can really feel the vibe of the house and the area that they're in. I just wished, obviously the reason that it has been so kind of slow paced is probably to build up that tension for the crescendo that is the ending, because the last quarter of the book was really, really good. Similar to In Our Eyes that I had been discussing previously, where In Our Eyes started off really strong but ended really poorly. Mexican Gothic started off really slow. Now looking back on it while I'm discussing it and seeing about how the tension was built throughout, I'm now maybe thinking about taking that 4 stars up to maybe a 4.5. It was just at the time I was reading it, it was kind of frustrating how it was kind of unfolding slowly. But the last quarter of it was so good. There was action, it gave me the fear, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who has an interest in the genre. So that was everything I read in October. So the next video that's coming, I have a little mini book haul on the way. I will have my fortnightly wrap up for the first half of November, and then from then on it's probably going to be weekly wrap ups along with monthly favourites at the end of every month. But I don't know, it's all dependent on time. So happy reading, everybody. Hope everybody's having a nice day. Stay safe, wear a mask, socially distance, take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.